Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Collective Impact Forum virtual coffee. Jennifer Jester, Collective Impact Forum, and we're all with us here today. Before we dive into our conversation with today's guests, I'm just going to spend a few minutes orienting you to our session. Today's session will end, so feel free to grab a literal cup of coffee or water. As you can see, we like to keep it casual for our virtual coffee. My 3-year-old daughter's artwork behind us. So feel free to relax and listen and join the chat. We'll spend about the first half of our time together with me hosting a discussion with today's guests, Emily and Michael, and then we will turn to our questions chat. In addition, just so you have a note of this, the session is being recorded, so you will have access to it later to listen again or to share with friends. We will send a link out after the session to access that recording. And one note as well, the slides are available for you to download. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a handout section with a little 1 next to it, and that is the location where you can download the handouts of today's presentation. Next slide. If you are having any difficulty during the session, you can use the question box to ask a technical question. In addition, during the session, all of you are muted, so we encourage your questions, and please do provide those in the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're, please also on Twitter. Next slide. During our virtual coffee series this summer, we are highlighting different topics from initiatives that participated in new research. So earlier this year, called When Impact was published by our group, the Collective Impact Forum, and conducted by Spark Policy Institute and ORS Impact. And the study examined the prime question of, and under what conditions this approach contribute to systems and population change. The full report is available on collectiveimpactforum.org, as is a webinar with who conducted the study. And into September, we are lucky to be doing one-on-one interviews with some of the sites that did participate in the study. Next page. So there were 25 sites that participated in the Collective Impact Research Study. Home for Good, our participants today, were one of those 25, and they were one of the 8 sites that had a site visit from the research team to go in depth to really explore the population impacts that were occurring in the collective impact work. So lucky to have from Home for Good with us. Next slide. So joining us today from Home for Good, we have Emily Bradley and Michael Nailat. Emily Bradley leads strategic grant making for Home for Good, a community-driven initiative that represents over 300 cross-sector partners working collaboratively on systems and solutions to homelessness in LA County. In this role, she works to grow and coordinate private philanthropy and public investment in Solution Home for Good Funders Collaborative. Prior to joining the team, economic mobility team at United Way, supporting the initiative's partners, working with low-income families, and helping launch a veteran employment program. At United Way, Emily solidified her commitment to addressing systemic issues and passion for philanthropic impact with her first book as a grant writer and service as an AmeriCorps Vista member, focused on nonprofit capacity building in Orange County. Joining Emily today is Michael Nailat. He is a program officer with the Home for Good team focused on data. He is the founder and lead organizer of the Homelessness Analysis Collaborative, the HAC or HAC, an alliance of researchers and analysts throughout LA County that develops tools and creative approaches to better understanding homelessness and ways to end it. He also leads United Way's efforts to create a centralized research table on homelessness, the Homelessness Policy Research Institute, where leading researchers can work through collective research priorities and coordinate responsive research to pressing system and service needs. Prior to joining the team, Michael served as the Outcomes Unit Manager at the Los Angeles Homelessness Services Authority, where he oversaw grantee performance reporting, continuum-wide goal setting, and HMIS report development. Emily and Michael, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. So I think a great place, hi, great. Let's go to the next slide. So I think as a place to start, it would be helpful for you to give us an overview of Home for Good's work and your roles within the initiative.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to be on this coffee with all of you, and we're excited to share more about our work. Michael's taking the coffee literally. And we are just excited to share more about our work. We were very lucky, as Jen mentioned, to be one of the sites selected for the in-depth analysis around the collective impact study, and have been able to share that study with others in our network, which has helped really amplify our work and, you know, showcase and share our message. So to give you a sense of who we are in the frame of what we do, so United Way of Greater Los Angeles is part of the network of United Ways across the nation and internationally. You might be familiar with the brand because we are in most communities in some way, shape, or form. And in Los Angeles, we really focus on education, financial stability, and housing and homelessness. I'll give you some context on how we kind of landed on housing and homelessness and what we do overall, including the structure and framework of our initiative here in LA. If you'll advance the slide. So in 2007, we went through a strategic planning effort where we were deciding kind of which way we would go in terms of our work. At the time, we really focused on health and basic needs, where housing was a component of that and homelessness was a component, but not the main focus of our efforts. And really, we were at a time where there was great fragmentation in our sector. Homelessness is a unique issue where there is no one set actor who's responsible for ending homelessness. It is really something that does take a collective effort to address, because it's something that affects us all, but is no one agency, entity's single responsibility to end. And at the time, we had in Los Angeles some really amazing programs. We helped launch Housing First as a principle and practice across the nation, but we didn't have a system. We had nothing that connected all of these, you know, independent, really amazing programs to make sure that folks were finding them and finding services and supports that they needed. And at the same time, also, we are a very massive area with a very massive need, and we had limited resources that we were working with at the time. And we'll talk a little bit more how about we've grown those resources over time, but this was the stage that was set when we started our work. If you advance the slide. So in terms of really what that means is United Way in 2010 launched the Home for Good initiative, which is a cross-sector initiative now that has grown to about 300 partners across different sectors, nonprofit, for-profit, our public agency partners, and obviously our faith-based communities as well. And we really walked into a community that had a high need. At the time, our homeless count was 90,000 people, which is a huge number. Right now, to give you context, we're about 53,000 people who are currently experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County on any given night. I'll let Michael give more context on the data side in a few minutes. At the same time, too, again, we were walking into a situation where we had a huge leadership vacuum, that the city and county did not get along. You may experience this as well in your communities, where we have different public agencies with different responsibilities. Cities are very much responsible for housing. County is very much responsible for services. But you need both to end homelessness. And so how can we merge those conversations? And at the same time, you know, United Way was looking for where should we dive in, where should we dig in? And we're in a unique position being a nonprofit and a funder, having great business relationships, but also having great elected relationships. And we kind of live between a lot of worlds. And in that way, we were well positioned to take on an issue that also lives between worlds. If you'll advance the slide. So in 2010, we launched our Home for Good initiative. And really what that is about bringing together different actors to help drive forward change. We do this through a series of drivers to end homelessness, and we'll talk about those in a few minutes, but really they center around some of the issues and concerns around scarcity of resources, around different systems that were disparate and fragmented, around how can we address some of these issues with data and quality of data. and really driving forward these changes in a collective way, so that we can ensure that we have buy-in and we're continuing to progress. And so a lot of the early days was about really trying to start from the bare bones of, what do we all believe that we can end homelessness? Do we all believe in housing first? Do we believe that we can actually coordinate dollars? And starting from simple spaces where we could bring people together with shared goals and shared measurements and move forward. And over time, our initiative has definitely built in size, but at the time we had one program officer, and just relationships that we relied on more than anything. We didn't have much skin in the game. We didn't have any, reasonable authority to do this, but we made the space and we built relationships and that trust, which has led to a very large network. If you'll advance the slide. So we now have a network of over 300 partners. This is very tiny. I totally understand. You do have the slides that you can then use as a PDF and zoom in on different components. But to give you a sense of our system and our structure, so United Way helps lead several different tables around our work. We have policy tables with key public agencies. We have partners tables with kind of the core agencies working on this issue. We have our Home for Good Funders Collaborative, which I lead, which is all of our funders, public and private, who are investing in this issue. We have data leadership tables. So in all of the aspects of our work, we have these leadership tables, and then they all communicate and connect. And one of the strengths of our work is that we've lived across them all, so that we can connect and continue to make the conversations consistent, and to continue to drive forward towards change, rather than just getting stuck in committees. So this is kind of the overwhelming version. It's not where we started, but it really kind of shows you the multitude of tables and conversations it takes to create this collective work, and the amount of time. We are meeting heavy. With the growth of our initiative has come the growth of our meetings as well. But if you'll advance our slide, you'll see kind of like the streamlined version of it. So all of our Home for Good initiatives and work center around kind of 4 big buckets and 4 key drivers. So data, resources, systems, and engagements, which are these kind of 4 buckets you see on the screen. And all of these have been consistent throughout our work, and we believe are also consistent across many collective impact initiatives. So we have a key staff member who's responsible for each of these buckets. And within that, also additional supporting staff to help execute a lot of our strategies. So Michael leads our data work. I lead our resource work. We have one key staff member, Eric, who is new to our team, who leads systems. We're excited for growth. And our engagement work, which is, we launched earlier this year, a new chapter of that work called Everyone In. And it's everyoneinla.org if you're interested in checking it out. It's a communications engagement campaign that's countywide and really driving forward both the education around homelessness, which is a complex issue, but also driving people to participate so that we can grow this collective effort. So that gives you a sense of kind of our overall structure and kind of our key roles within that. And in terms, before I hand it over to Michael, I'll just highlight the, kind of a couple key wins that we've had over time. So kind of within the structure, each of our buckets manages key stakeholder groups. So we have key tables, key strategies in each of these buckets, and we've had key wins. So Michael will speak to the data side specifically, but in the resource side, I think something you may have heard about is Los Angeles recently passed 2 major ballot propositions by the voters. One is around housing, to $1.2 billion housing bond in the city of Los Angeles to build 10,000 units of supportive housing, which is huge, and helps address some of our gaps and needs for our most vulnerable populations. And then a ballot measure that's a sales tax, the first one of its kind to pass in Los Angeles on a spring ballot. So we were very excited about that. And United Way helped lead that effort to pass that ballot initiative. And ultimately that has led to $355 million a year of support for services. I know these are big numbers, but we are a big county. There are other communities who are doing similar work on smaller scales. And also, I mean, when we started our Funders Collaborative table, we had 5 core funders who just helped coordinate with public dollars and was nowhere near the size of these commitments that have been made, but all around coordinating resources. In our systems change work, you may have heard in your communities around the coordinated entry system, which is a system by which we identify, assess, and match people to housing. It's a simple concept in nature, but communities like ours didn't have systems of change and systems that connected programs. And so this is something that we helped lead, and LA helped lead the nation on building as a best practice. And so every community now has some kind of coordinated access and entry system. And so we're excited about the growth of that system and what that has meant for getting people home. And ultimately, and again, the engagement side, our Everyone in campaign is our big effort and our big push, and we encourage you to look at that. And ultimately, all these collective efforts and all these key drivers have led to a serious population change. So in the last 3 years alone, our community has permanently housed over 40,000 people. Which is huge. And we've also seen just over between the last homeless count and this year's homeless count, which is our annual point in time where we collect all information about homelessness. We've also seen a reduction of 18% in chronic homelessness, which is our most vulnerable people, and 19% in veteran homelessness. And those are two key populations for Home for Good and where we started our work, really addressing the needs of those who are most vulnerable first, but also proving that with resources like the veteran community and the political will like the veteran community has had, that you could address and truly show population change. And so those are some of the key wins across the board, but that I think all these key drivers have led into and really helped shape and change the narrative in our community around what is possible, which has also then led to the confidence and commitment of the voters to continue to invest in that. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to answer questions in the interim, but also I want to obviously throw it to Michael to dive into the data, which is the heart of this conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you, Emily. That was such a helpful overview, and congrats to you and all of the partners on the incredible work that you all have been doing for almost a decade now. So amazing, amazing. So yes, let's look at the topic of data. And so we're, of course, so lucky to have Michael, who leads that work with us. And as a place to start, Michael, it would be helpful if you could tell us a little bit just in general about how Home for Good is using data to drive your work, and in particular, the kind of data that you're using to track progress of the work, and how you're really sharing that data to inform the work of the collaborative.
Sure. Again, Michael, thank you, Emily. I think it all goes back to kind of really understanding, what do we use data for in the first place, right? So as mentioned in my quick little bio, I used to work at the Homeless Services Authority, where I really oversaw performance reports, really tried to understand, are we making progress towards achieving the goals that we need to end homelessness? And inherent in that conversation and that thought is, are we even setting the right goals? Are we even really focusing on the things that really have the most impact? So when it came over to the Home for Good team here at the United Way, the longstanding questions were, how are we doing? What are we even doing? And to what degree do any of those things serve as drivers or levers in our efforts to make an impact on homelessness and homelessness? So in a broad sense, the first thing that we did was kind of figure out, what is the data that exists? And if you advance to the next slide, kind of a summary of some of the things that we were looking at and how we tried to kind of impact what the data sources we were working with look like. So for the most part, and for the longest time, as Emily referenced before, we relied on things like the homeless count, which fluctuates depending on, who is on the streets and who is counted and who's in shelters on a specific given night, on a specific week, at the beginning of the year, the last week of January, every other year, now every year. But just trying to understand, like at a given point in time, who were the people experiencing homelessness? But for the longest time, that was all that we had. And to really kind of understand homelessness is to really understand, what are the ebbs and flows in the interim throughout the year. How are people achieving things like getting housed, getting services, and really, are we able to say from not just year to year, but even month to month, maybe even down to like week to week, what are the numbers looking like, and how should we pivot our efforts on services and housing to make sure that we are focusing in the right ways? So again, before, when we did the homeless count, it was something that only happened every other year. It was mandated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development that we do this annual or biannual census. And so one of the things that we pushed for was really saying we should count this at least every year. so that we don't have to wait, another 2 years to kind of figure out how we made progress. Are there issues that we're not seeing because we're waiting so long for this data to come out? And even then, when the homeless count was done in previous years, it was very much a sample-based census. A certain amount of census tracts were counted. And so another thing that we pushed for was to say, like, let's count the entirety of the county, because that's the entirety of the county that we're trying to impact. Again, thinking about, what is the data that we're collecting, and figuring out, do we know whether or not anything that we're doing regarding, housing and services or anything really is making a difference. And so really kind of figuring out what is the data in between the homeless count that we need to pay attention to on a regular basis. How do we kind of track that in a meaningful way? And so pushing for things like the aforementioned Homelessness Management Information System, the HMIS, to be a tool that was not just focused on collecting data, but giving data back out, giving us an analysis of what was happening. And not even just looking at it from a broad overall LA County perspective, but LA County is huge, 10 million plus people. Each region is almost like its own city, its own county, really, in comparison to other geographies. And so can we start honing in on specifically what's happening in communities, what's happening in parts of LA that might be very different geographically, demographically, from the rest of the county? So overall, it was really kind of thinking about what data do we have, what data do we have access to, what does that data really tell us, if anything at all? And that's a lot to kind of get your head wrapped around. It was a lot for us to get our heads wrapped around. And so what I did as a result was start something called the Homelessness Analysis Collaborative, or the HAC. And so you can advance to the next slide. And really the HAC was a way for us to kind of consolidate our efforts around data, to kind of figure out, what is out there and what isn't out there. To have the right stakeholders at the table, because really we don't own a lot of the data that we talk about. A lot of this data is coming from our public partners. We're not a public agency, we're a nonprofit. We do have grantees, but as only a slice of kind of the overall equation. So we can't do this alone. We can't do this with our data that's sitting in our own databases by itself. We need to develop partnerships and develop databases and tools that really kind of draws people in, draws our partners in. And it's something that is mutually seen as a benefit to our overall conversations on homelessness and ending homelessness. So the hack, with the idea that we were going to hack homelessness with data, was formed to kind of bring those stakeholders to the table and talk about, why don't we know what we need to know, and how do we get to the point where we're really having real conversations using real data in ways to have real impact. And figuring out, is it our public agencies, the main funders of the system? Is it kind of researchers and data analysts kind of from throughout the community? Who else needs to be in these conversations to help us kind of broaden our understanding of homelessness in a real way, so that we can kind of start kind of developing solutions, real solutions and real policies that we can then also measure the impact of moving forward. And so what you see slide is just kind of like a snapshot of kind of the main HAC website. And it's really simple, but I mean, I think within that is kind of contained a lot of the kind of key parts of that overall initiative. So I think we can jump to, well, let's go to the next slide. So this is just a snapshot of the dashboards that we have on this website. And so the idea behind creating dashboards was that using the collective data that we're trying to gather, can we start speaking to, in a very kind of succinct but meaningful way, about what is happening with homelessness in LA County? Again, if we were relying just on the homeless count that comes out once a year, even though that we're doing it annually now, how do we know that we're actually making progress? And so I think we can switch to sharing what's on my screen. And let me switch to, whoops. Did that go through?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So here we go. So again, here's the HAC website. And really kind of just, kind of on top of the navigation bar that kind of lays out kind of the key things that I'm working on, that we as Home for Good are working on regarding data. And so as aforementioned, the dashboards page, and this is really the whole website. And what I tried to do is kind of like lay out just in general terms, what are all these dashboards? What do they tell us? What are their scopes? Because there's so many different dimensions to homelessness in LA County. And really kind of these dashboards are kind of geared towards, showing, are we making progress, especially along the lines of those initiatives and ballot measures that Emily mentioned earlier, Proposition Triple H, Measure H. Is that money going somewhere meaningful? And how do we make sure that we continue on track to achieving the goals laid out by those systems. And so these are the kind of the four main dashboards linked on here that I developed in coordination with the county and the city of Los Angeles. And each one kind of speaks to different things. So the Measure H dashboard looks at overall county homelessness, how many people are getting housed, and how many people do we need to house. Homeless count, which is kind of just a summary provided by our Homeless Services Authority on, what do the numbers look like on an annual basis. Dashboards on our coordinated entry system, which is something that we help foster, that helps us make sure that anyone who approaches a shelter or outreach person will get directed to the right services based upon their needs. And again, Proposition Triple H, which is tracking whether or not we're building enough housing according to the amount of money that the voters approved of. Was it 2 years ago now? Something like that. So each one of these, I kind of lay out, what is the content we choose these dashboards, what geography that does it cover, how often these are updated. But overall, kind of this goes back to the very idea that if we want to understand homelessness, we need to pay attention to as closely and as frequently as possible, and really kind of identify, are there trends that we can kind of jump on and kind of figure out, do we need to change policies? Do we need to change the conversation? Do we need to find more resources? So I'll just briefly walk through two of the main dashboards that we've developed. So first one is—
Michael, could I just ask a quick question before you dive into the dashboards about where the data is coming from, so we understand a little more? So you've mentioned that most of it is coming from public agencies, and I'm curious if is there also any that's coming from service providers, nonprofits, or is this all publicly available?
So the majority of the data comes from our Homeless Management Information System, which is managed by our Homeless Services Authority. And that database contains data provided by service providers that are funded or not even, or just providing services in our community. It's a federally mandated system that collects both service data, outcomes, demographics, et cetera. And so by and large, at least by legal mandate, this database is supposed to contain as much information about our homeless population as possible, provided by service providers and those people doing outreach. And so the biggest chunk of the data comes from there. But because our system is kind of spread out amongst different kind of departments and agencies, some of our housing data will also come from our housing departments. And also some of the data will come from things like we have like the Los Angeles County Homelessness Initiative, which is a large overarching kind of effort by the county to kind of help kind of coordinate services and housing. Yeah, LA County is huge, and there's a lot of different departments that are doing a lot of different things. And data was seen as a way to kind of start connecting the dots a little bit more clearly as well. But so yeah, I would say a good 80–90% of the data comes from the Homeless Services Authority, which comes from service providers and any other agencies that are providing some level of resources or services. And as I'll mention later, we also working with this group called the Homelessness Policy Research Institute, who's also going to be a source of data moving forward as well. So
great. Thank you. Sorry to divert you from demoing the dashboard. We'd love to see that.
No worries. So on screen now should be the County Homelessness Initiative Impact Dashboard. And right now it's just a snapshot of what happened in the latter half of 2017. And how this came about was that when Measure H, which was a bond measure for how much money was it? For
quarter-cent sales tax that was estimated to reach $355 million a year for 10 years.
And so built into that, in the creation of that, was this idea that we would help create a way to make sure the public understood where this money was going and how our overall county efforts on ending homelessness were proceeding. And there were specific metrics that we wanted to identify and make publicly available. So that was looking at how many people were coming into shelters, interim housing, how many people were getting permanently housed, how many people were being prevented from becoming homeless, and how does that fit into kind of some of the larger goals around Measure H. And so what you see before you is kind of a simple initial approach to that, and I think we're going to broaden it much more over the course of the next couple of months. But it was really looking at kind of overall, how are we doing on these key metrics? And what you can do with this dashboard is you can also drill down into things like what is happening with homeless families specifically, what is happening with single homeless adults, veterans, which is one of our priority populations, youth, and what is specific to just Measure H funding alone. So it's a way to kind of like help people kind of understand, like, this is in different dimensions the way that our resources and efforts around ending homelessness as a county are proceeding. And so one of the things that's happening with the overall county initiative is that they report out to the public quarterly. I want to make sure this dashboard is updated just as often as well. And so the next update for this is probably going to be in the next couple of weeks, but we want to start showing also, are there trends in terms of like, are the number of people that we're permanently housing, is that going up at the rate that it needs to? Are prevention efforts actually having an impact, and so on? And, these are things that don't exist in a vacuum. These are just kind of like what we wanted to focus on as part of this conversation. But, eventually we also want to kind of pair it along the lines of like, how's the homeless count being affected? Are we seeing from year to year a change? The other major dashboard that we created was with the city of Los Angeles, and this one is tracking Proposition Triple H. And so what this is really kind of an overview of whether or not the $1.2 billion that voters approved of for 10,000 units of housing, how many units have we built over, whatever time period that we're reporting here. And this is as of April of 2018, but it'll be updated again in the next couple of weeks because the funding cycles related to creating this housing happens about 3 times a year. But a lot of the questions are like, okay, the public is asking, we approved of this funding, where is it going? How are we using this money? Where are the housing units showing up? What parts of LA are being impacted? And this is specific to LA City again. So, you can see that, we're tracking out how many units were created as of, the start of measure or Proposition Triple H, how much money has been approved to be used out of that 1.2 billion. Also looking at, are we leveraging resources outside of Triple H to, build this housing? And again, geographically, where are these things showing up? And are we reaching the communities that need to have housing built? So, it's just a quick overview of like really, what is the impact that's happening? Are our investments, leading to real impact? And, making sure that we're taking the data that's being collected, often behind the scenes, public data, but data that's often just kind of sits in council reports, in evaluations, things that the public might not think to reach out to, and present it in a way that they can kind of understand it and ask, meaningful questions about it. In fact, this dashboard that I'm showing you right now is on our mayor's website, and the mayor has kind of this priority on making sure that they're sharing, what are our achievements and, challenges moving forward on all these different initiatives. And so the mayor is choosing to feature our progress on Proposition Triple H on his website. So again, it's really kind of pulling in data from a lot of different sources and creating dashboards like this to really kind of show the value add to both increased and improved transparency, but also making sure that we're focusing on things that will lead to other conversations, like the numbers you see before you now on Triple H. The question then becomes, is this enough understanding of this measure? Are we making enough progress? Are we focusing on the right communities? And so hopefully leading to questions that will let us collect more data that we need to help us understand, are we having the impact that we need to have?
Mm-hmm. And Michael, several people have asked questions about what software is used to create the dashboards. We saw a Tableau logo on this one.
Definitely Tableau.
So I don't know if that's Tableau. Yeah. Is there any other technology that you're employing to create these dashboards?
So for these dashboards I'm showing you right now, they're primarily built in Tableau. I do use a little bit of Esri ArcGIS to do some of the mapping stuff sometimes. But that's more for kind of like more in-depth kind of analysis of the stuff you're seeing in front of you now. But for the most part, it's built in Tableau. I have everything captured, not in the most optimal way through an Excel spreadsheet. But often I have to do that because, again, we don't own a lot of the databases that really feed the data into these dashboards. We have to work with our partners to have, often de-identified data sets delivered to us because, sometimes there's sensitive information about clients being served or the people who are being affected. So we reach out for specific data points, consolidate that in our own database, often a spreadsheet, import that into Tableau, and then kind of build the visualizations from there. Really simple. I mean, I think at the onset of creating the hack, I mean, it was even as simple as using Google Docs and using Google Sheets. And yeah, Google Maps, all those tools, because often, we were still trying to figure out what was the best way to approach these things, what is most accessible to the people who want to use these tools. So even the first dashboards that were on the website, they're not on it now, but we're just live Google Sheets that were shared, and we're dynamic. So every time we put in data, it would automatically update what was on the website. And it's really, I mean, if you know how to use Excel, you'll probably know how to use Google Sheets. So, I mean, it's evolved over time. And so often what we tend to think about is, what is most accessible, what is most compatible, what will lead to, will hopefully like require the least amount of time management. as possible. And often because we're working with partners who don't do this level of analysis and visualization even, we just want to make sure that we just send them a link that they can then embed on their websites and then host live. And the way that Tableau is set up too is that, I don't have to go back to these agencies and say like, oh, I need to make an update. Can you do this and this and that? Everything is hosted on our own Tableau public page. And so I can just go in, update the information. It'll automatically propagate to all the websites that it's linked on. And it's set up so that like if anybody wanted to embed this dashboard in their own website, they're more than welcome to, and the link is shareable on the bottom of each page. So, and one thing to note is that a lot of this software that we've used, I mean, we've gotten it through resources like TechSoup, who has very heavily discounted rates on things like Tableau. I think like for a Tableau license, if you bought it by retail, it's like $1,200, but if you got it through TechSoup, which serves nonprofit organizations, it's $50 for 2 years. So, I mean, if anyone is thinking like, oh, I can't afford to use these platforms and these tools, there are nonprofit discounts, even for things like ArcGIS, even for things like, and even just using things like Google Docs as a way to kind of start kind of building that facet of your work, I mean, is a free resource. So we tend to use whatever we have access to and whatever we can afford at the time, and use that as justification, kind of build out more robust tools and visualizations, et cetera.
Yeah. And how much manpower is needed, or woman power is needed, to maintain the dashboards? We know that is, we know about you, but are there others that join you?
So the hardest part about maintaining a dashboard is not so much the back-end data piece of it, because it's a simple spreadsheet. And, up until maybe about 2 months ago, I was the only data person specifically focused on data within the team. And so for the most part, it was me managing a lot of this in coordination with our partners, who also have analysts and data people that I would connect with and sit on our hack table. But yeah, in terms of the dashboards itself, I mean, it's pretty much just kind of updating a spreadsheet. That being said, I think like what takes up most of my time is getting the data itself. And through the hack, we try to kind of develop at least informal partnerships and using dashboards to demonstrate, why wouldn't you want to share data through this platform? But one of the things that we're starting to move towards too is kind of more formal agreements, memorandums of understanding, and just making sure that it's clear that this is the reason that we want to collect data. This is what it's going to be used for. These are the things to make sure that we don't kind of violate any kind of privacy concerns that might be there. And this is how regularly we want the data. And so part of really, managing a tool like this is making sure that you're clear with your partners who have the majority of the data in our case, are responsive to that.
Yeah. So we'll come back to, we have a lot of great questions coming in, but I will ask my last question right now before I turn to more participant questions. So how has using the data, or how has using and sharing the data led you to achieve some of your goals, or led to a change in practice because you have had access and presentation of data in such a coherent way?
I would say, just it's going to sound a little crazy, but I mean, just making data available in a public way leads to a lot of conversations that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise. When we launched the hack, I mean, it was with some initial skepticism about our goals. And even when I was still at the Homeless Service Authority, a lot of the conversations were about like, why would the public need to know this data, or what would they do with this data? Do we even have the capacity to really contextualize it in a way that leads to a meaningful conversation, meaningful policy change, et cetera? So, really just, when we launched the hack, we kind of just started doing dashboards with the data that we had on hand. That led to kind of more conversations about how do we make sure that data is better, bringing people to the table that might have been reticent to participate at first, because they also wanted to make sure our community was represented in the most accurate way so that we would have good conversations. And so when we first started all of this work, it was really kind of like, all we had was the homeless count. And then as we started to put out dashboards and tools, it really kind of motivated everyone else to kind of step up to the plate and say, we want to be a part of these conversations. We want to create our own dashboards. And so it's not just about us putting out data out there and, pushing people towards transparency. It's other about motivating our partners to do the same. And in doing that, that helps kind of contribute to our overall conversations as a collective at our other tables, like the Funders Collaborative, or we have a policy table also that kind of talks about these issues. And so I guess overall, it's kind of make sure that we are constantly pushing each other as a community to, look at the data, put out more data, to spend more time kind of considering, what are the impacts of that. I think one of the most impactful moments was about maybe 3 years ago when we were talking about, can we use the data that we have on hand to understand how much resources we need to end homelessness, how much housing do we need, how much services do we need, how much money do we need to really get to zero. And so we sat down with our partners at App Associates, who is a consultant for HUD and is a partner in a lot of our efforts. We sat down with the Homeless Services Authority, and it was as simple as filling out basically a spreadsheet and plugging in some numbers, doing a little bit of research, kind of figure out, oh, we need 10,000 units of supportive housing in the city of Los Angeles. We need, this much shelter, this much outreach resources to really have the impact that we're meaning to make. And this is how long it'll probably take us to get to zero and things like that. Something as simple as kind of, seeing that as something that just naturally should happen was probably the best outgrowth of all these conversations. Because if you asked me like 5 years ago even, no one would have thought to even come together to do that. And the real impact of that conversation and that tool and that spreadsheet was literally kind of the numbers that were behind Measure H, Proposition Triple H. All those numbers were based upon a spreadsheet, like literally a spreadsheet. And it's kind of mind blowing to me that we just sat in the room and filled it out. And then all of a sudden we have, millions and billions of dollars to kind of devote to these efforts. And so I make it sound really easy, and it wasn't. But I mean, again, making people feel like data should be a priority, making people feel like sharing data is a natural thing, making people feel like we can make decisions using robust data, robust research, to really understand what kind of investments we need to make as a community, is something that exists now. And there's still more work to be done, but if we hadn't really focused our conversations on how data could have an impact, I don't know where we would be at this point. So
I'll just add to a couple like tangible examples to underscore Michael's point is like our data has been a through line and it has driven our policy conversations in a real way. So as Michael mentioned, our gaps analysis, which was included in our homelessness plans for the city and the county, gave us the number that we knew we had to get to that told us we needed a sales tax. Like it is, they informed the conversation and made it very clear to everyone at the table that we were talking about the same thing at the same scale. And even Measure H, sometimes data isn't what people want to put in. Data is numbers that mean accountability. And so we try to walk the line of both using data for celebration as well as accountability. So we do a lot to celebrate the milestones and wins of our community through data, but also hold people accountable. For example, if you go to our Everyone In website, you will see each council member featured and their friendly face, and a number of how many units they've approved, which feeds into kind of that measure, that Proposition HHH dashboard that Mike was mentioning. So it kind of goes hand in hand of like, here's all the great accomplishments we have through this dashboard, but also you should know that your council member hasn't committed as many resources and commitments as others. And so how can we then deploy our organizing team towards those who need a little extra nudge? And even like in the ballot measure, I will say the three big goals that are featured on the dashboard were written into the ballot measure, because we also know that public agencies live and die by data, but at the same time, they're not always going to impose an accountability measure on themselves if they don't have to. So we put it into the ballot measure so that the voters of Los Angeles said, we would like you to reach 45,000 people housed, 30,000 people that are prevented from homelessness. We did that so that now we can hold all of ourselves accountable to those measures.
And I'll just add to building upon that we're probably oversimplifying some of this too, but I mean, I think the key part of all this is trust, and the idea that working together is to the benefit of overall goals of ending homelessness. I mean, it's something that we built out through all these different aspects of our work. Even like just the data stuff alone, it wasn't a matter of like a natural idea that we would do all this together and that data would be such a critical part of it. But it was coming to an agreement and deciding collectively that we needed data both for understanding kind of the need, but also to hold ourselves accountable, and to really kind of own what is it that we're doing and how can we do better on that. And so really it was just a matter of really building a trust amongst all of our partners at the table, making sure that they were even there at the table and had a meaningful voice. so that we could do the things that we're doing now. So, I mean, and that took, years of work. So it wasn't just an overnight natural idea that would do all of these things, but we got there because, the benefit that people say that we bring to the table is that we're, one of the key conveners, and that we're also really good about kind of really reaching out to the public and getting them in the conversation. So that is a value add that I think our public agencies tend to struggle with. And so the reason why we're always at the table and often leading the table is because we can kind of fill in that gap for everybody else.
Yeah. So several people are asking questions about or reflecting that in their communities, there often is a struggle to have a struggle with the many nonprofit partners having limited data collection capacity, skills, time, budget, expertise. And I'm curious if that's something that you face or if that's mitigated because they already have to provide data into the HIMS. So lots of people are curious about the capacity challenges that many nonprofits face and how that plays out in the work that you're doing.
So, I mean, a lot of the data that we work with is stuff that's collected by mandate. But I think, one of the things that we also took a step back and thought about was whether or not that was the right data in the first place. And even like within that system, we've had a number of recommendations on like data points and things that make even more sense to collect as part of that. But I think if you're in a situation in which that might not be something that's available, one of the things that we do through the hack, and as you kind of dig onto the website, if for those of you who want to take a look at it, is that, while there might be dozens, hundreds of data points that are collected by that system, we focus on maybe like a handful, maybe like 5, 10 things at most. And really the conversation you should be having with your partners and other nonprofits is, let's think about our theory of change and figure out, what leads to what leads to what. And can we kind of focus in on maybe those 3 to 5 data points that make the most sense for us to kind of track and develop kind of better understanding of what's happening. I mean, what we've had to do in LA County, because we're so big, is that we've created this role called regional data coordinators. And so within each region is somebody who's supposed to help us kind of own locally what is happening in terms of impact. And obviously that's not something that everyone can do, but I mean, identifying kind of like key partners to kind of lead different aspects of these efforts to help us understand things, because one person can't do it alone, even a team can't do it alone. Really kind of figuring out who are the people most concerned about and have the most capacity to contribute to these kind of efforts. How can you hone in on kind of the most streamlined version of what data you need to track? And really kind of just, having conversations with the data. Keeping the data alive is, I think, a critical part of it too, because I think even like major data collection efforts and data analysis efforts, you need kind of that sense that it's going to go somewhere, that there's going to be a real impact and real conversation regarding the data for you to want to invest your time in that way. So it's not easy per se, but I think it's made something that people want to do because we can kind of demonstrate not just why we need to collect data, but what does it actually lead to as a result.
And I think, I mean, from the funding side, we hear this capacity issue a lot. Even now with the influx of resources, we're actually in capacity on that other side of having an issue of being flooded with resources, actually a challenge in itself as well. A good challenge, but one that is definitely affecting our nonprofit community. And to Michael's point, I think one thing that we've provided is we are doing the legwork of creating shared tools, providing training, building the infrastructure that is shared, and trying to work with nonprofits through the Academy and other avenues to try to provide ways where the data can be integrated in their work. I think a lot of times, to Michael's point, it's the other thing I have to do. I have to put in this data, and they're not seeing it as a natural component of the work that they're already doing. So how to integrate it more fully, and then provide them with the tools and training and infrastructure they need to be able to deploy that. And a lot of that is, I think it's a little bit of paralysis. They're like a little nervous by data. I think we all, being kind of in the people and puppies kind of side of things, are not analytical people by nature necessarily in the type of nonprofit that we are. And so we're trying to bridge that divide so that this is about showcasing your work. This is about celebration. This is about serving your clients better. And all of that takes some level of information that we can work from and build off of. But starting somewhere, and I think for our local area as well is talking to like what does that data point mean? A lot of times our frontline folks do not understand why they're putting something in the system. So giving them that context provides a lot of their buy-in, which provides you better data, which then gives you more information to work from and build more infrastructure around. But starting there, and I will say, I mean, the philanthropic community, the business community are all amazing resources also in terms of providing expertise and even investment into the capacity of nonprofits, and are very interested in that side of the house, the accountability, data management side of the house, especially. So I think look to your business sector and your philanthropic community for the influx of investment that it takes to get there as well.
And I'll just say on that note that one of the things that we did, because we are a funder, is we work with our partners at the Homeless Services Authority to reduce the burden of reporting on their funding. And so we used to have different reports that they had to submit as part of that. And we worked with the Homeless Services Authority to kind of consolidate our reporting, so they only had one report they had to worry about between the two of us. So, and also making sure that the report spoke to the things that they cared about, and working with them to kind of craft that report itself. And so it was a mix of making sure that they were getting the tools that was useful to the providers, and also that they had a less of a burden reporting back to us of their progress on those things.
That's great. Did you have to establish any new data sharing agreements in order to get these dashboards and all of the other data work into place?
So, at this stage, not yet, because we're not looking at client level information. We're just looking at aggregate numbers. And so sharing that data, it's just a matter of kind of helping people understand that it doesn't violate any of the current privacy agreements that might be behind some of those data systems. So at this stage, no, but I think we're trying to move towards a system that really is consolidated across all of the systems, that has more identified information, so that we can kind of link if somebody's trying to get certain services and certain kinds of housing, is that the same person, and how are they utilizing the whole system more broadly? And that's something that's falling under our Homelessness Policy Research Institute, the HPRI as we call it. And that's working on that effort to make sure that like the data is one place, that we can use it for more kind of robust analysis and research. But at this stage, no, not really. I mean, I think to the degree that it's not necessary, and so that you don't have kind of like these kind of holdups in trying to move forward with data as much as possible. But you'll get to a point where if you want to know more, you're going to have to do that, and we're working towards that right now.
And all of our clients who are working with information do sign a consent form that we've actually adopted over time to be broader, so that their care and coordination can be managed by multiple entities, inclusive of public agencies, engaged nonprofits, and others besides, so that we moved from a system where you owned your clients to a system that shares clients. And so that has taken agreements on the client level, and we're also excited about some new state legislation that allows for some care coordination is broadening like who's involved in that care team, which is exciting for us because we run into the issue, as I'm sure many others do, around confidential information and not wanting to go to HIPAA jail. And so we're trying very hard to balance the needs of clients to keep their confidentiality while still keeping continuity of care with hospital systems, with jail systems, with our homeless information system. And so we're working through some of those. And we're excited about our new data system. Our HMIS system moved to a new vendor, and there's more possibilities for building data bridges that would have unidentified information that could be shared across, but connect clients across systems, which would be our next data adventure.
Folks are curious for a little more detail on the time frame, the timelines that it has taken to get from, start to where you are now. Could you speak to that a little bit?
So, I've been a part of this team for the last 5-6 years now. I really kicked off a lot of our data initiatives maybe like a year or two into that. So I think from first identifying kind of like who I wanted to be at the table and the kind of conversations we wanted to have and the data that we needed, I mean, the first initial dashboards came out maybe within like a year or two of launching the initiative. And then kind of like the more broad efforts around kind of getting better data, even getting a better data system. Again, like as Emily just mentioned, we have a new homeless management information system, and that didn't come about by itself. That came about because of feedback from a lot of the people that sit around the hack table, that we needed to have better tools. And so, from start to finish, or start to where we're at now, I'd say like 3-4 years, and I mean, not that it was just kind of this constant like chug, chug, chug. I mean, I think like we would always take a step back and kind of consider, what is the next phase of this work? Things like our research institute started last year. We have also this thing called the Academy, which is really kind of building regional data leadership. That started out last year too. And so we always kind of take a step back and kind of think about, it's not just about like the data broadly, but what is the role that we can play to help kind of drive better data, better analysis, better conversations. And so 3-4 years, but I mean, like every year has been a little bit different.
And 3 years of Michael plugging along alone and pushing and pushing and pushing the data agenda. And then a last year of like everyone being involved in data. And so it is also, it's worth your time and effort through the slow chug so that you can get to the point at which you have a bunch of different tables. Michael now has staff. We have these more like, built out tools. So 3 years of plugging along.
Yeah, a lot of trust building, a lot of
growth.
Exactly.
And in the current state, what is the total staff? And if you can quantify the budget that is dedicated to all of this data work?
That's a good question.
That's a hard one. So in terms of our team, we have 9 people total. That is also exponential growth. We had half of that as of a year and a half ago. But each year we basically gained a person through the Home for Good team. And the data side has 2 people now. Again, 3 years of Michael, and then explosion. So he got a staff member.
100% increase in capacity.
100% increase. Good data point. So that, and then in terms of the budget, we have to look at the numbers in terms of the data component in particular. It's all integrated, so it's really hard to pull out one component of our work from another. But we do have great philanthropic support that continue to support our operations, our main funder being the Conrad and Hilton Foundation, who funds locally around chronically homeless initiatives. But we do have several other private funders, and our team is privately funded. We are starting to coordinate public investment, but that is not managing any of our operations. In terms of the data team that, ultimately with kind of implementation and support, it's probably a $200,000 a year kind of effort between kind of staffing and implementation. Off the rough.
Maybe even less actually, but yeah.
And that doesn't include our big chunk of money is our grant making. So our investments in data initiatives through nonprofits not incorporated into that, which I would say they all go together. Our policy systems, data engagement work is all connected to resources and vice versa. So I think that has been a strength, being able to invest in data capacity at the same time we're helping build data capacity, and having data conversations is all connected.
And I mean, and on that note too, like I think, definitely there needs to be specific investment in data if you want to make movement on data. One of our grantees told me that, whenever they even apply for a grant, they always build into their budget the hiring of another data person for their efforts. So it's not like we're just going to take on money and do this thing. We're also going to build data capacity along with that. And so prioritizing data as part of the services and housing being provided is a critical component to making sure that you as a smaller nonprofit will be able to manage kind of like these things more actively.
Yeah. Well, we are bumping up on the end of our hour together. Time has flown by. And Michael and Emily, we actually have a lot of questions that we were not able to get to. So if you don't mind, I will volunteer you as resources for people who are on the line. If you have questions that you pose that were not addressed, please feel free to email our Collective Impact Forum team or Michael and Emily to get a little bit more detail. But thank you so much. And just so all of you know, there were over 400 folks on the line. So this topic was really of interest to many folks. So thank you, Michael and Emily, for your time. In closing, let's just go to the next slide, Sharon. We just want to let you know that we have 2 more virtual coffees coming up in September with the Elizabeth River Project on aligning partners, and one on sustaining momentum with the Milwaukee Teen Pregnancy Initiative and the Connecticut Juvenile Justice Alliance together. And for those of you looking for an in-person learning opportunity, the Collective Impact Forum is hosting our annual Champions for Change conference, actually down in Los Angeles. So if hearing all about the Home for Good work has enticed you to visit LA, come join us.
Buy some coffee.
Again, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining today. We wish you all a great day.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.